It's an honor to be here today. I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I hope that this time together will be meaningful. The worst thing I want to do is waste your time and mine, right? And so I do feel like what I have to present today can be of meaning to you as a parent with a child with neurological differences. And I think I have things that might be able to help streamline treatment to help get that child back into your home quicker, and also to help you become more effective as a parent. So just by way of some background, I'm a parent. I have been married many years, got 4 children. The ages 21 to 10, 3 boys and a girl. I know what it's like to have a child that struggles. I think I understand that. I've seen my children on a phone call suffering, not knowing what to do, wondering, how can I do this? What does it look like? And that's the biggest trial in my life, is seeing my own personal children suffer and me not being able to do anything about it. And that's probably what got me into the niche that I am, because this is a very niche field. And so I think I understand that. I haven't had to send my children away for treatment. I'll be clear about that. But that's not because I didn't make enough mistakes. That's just because my children might not be far enough on the spectrum that they needed that service. And so, hardest thing in my life is seeing my kids suffer. And it's so simple what they need to do, and me not being able to do it for them, right? And I think that can resonate with parents, is, look, all you gotta do is this, man. It's so simple, just freaking do it, right? And them not doing it, right? And it's like, I can't do it for you. I want to do it, and if I could, I would, because I want to relieve that suffering that you're experiencing. But I can't do it for you, and if you're unwilling to do it, you're gonna have to suffer. And that is freaking hard stuff right there, right? So with that, I would also say I didn't choose this field. Honestly, I feel like it chose me, and I can explain that in a lot more depth, but I'm not going to waste time because we're going to be short on time. But I didn't get a PhD and get in this field to help kids with neurological differences. It just opened, doors opened. I got a reputation for working with this kind of population. And honestly, when I started as a clinician, neurodiversity was not a word. Autism was not a word. It was Asperger's. It was, I don't know what's going on with this kid, but he's blown out of every program. And then they came to me, and I started figuring out how to effectively work with them. So there's been massive evolution, which we can talk about. So that's a little bit of the background, but it's a pleasure to be here, and I hope that this can be meaningful. So whoever's on the slides, maybe hit the next one. So when we talk about neurodiversity, I believe that there are people with microphones on both sides. We can probably hear each other. If you want to just ask a question, please stop me. We do have a lot to cover, but at the same time, if you have a question and I'm not making sense, just say like, hey, can you clarify that, or go more in depth with that? Be happy to, more than happy to, okay? Because what we're doing is I'm covering like the surface. I'm scratching the surface of what we're doing here. And I'm also covering things in really broad terms and generalizations. I don't know specifically your child, but what the information I'm going to present today will cover a lot of your child. And anything that is you want specifics on, I'm just going to say talk to your primary therapist, because they're going to know your child way more than I'm going to know your child, because I don't even know your child, right? And so with that, what is neurodiversity? When we talk about neurodiversity, this is a concept where differentiations and differences of neurology are recognized and respected as any other human variation. And then so on the second point here, there's tons of diagnoses. There's lots of different buckets you can put neurodiversity into. Tons, right? And there's getting more every day, right? And so there's this new diagnosis, and it's not a diagnosis, there's these new terms, and everything catches like fire, and then it's like, hey, everybody's in nonverbal learning disorder. 10 years ago, everyone was nonverbal learning disorder. Now you don't see that a whole lot. Now everybody's ADP, right? And so it's like, none of them are diagnosed, but yet it's these terms that get pushed around. But neurodiversity is here to stay, okay? And so really neurodiversity refers to variations in the human brain regarding sociability, learning, attention, mood, and other mental functions. Neil, please. So when I break it down clinically, let me say this before we start this slide. When you've seen one person with neurological diversity, you've seen one person, okay? So that's much different than other mental health issues. Because a depressed person, you see a depressed person, it's like, oh, this is the treatment modality for depression. Opposition defiant, this is the treatment modality, and you can cover a lot of ground with those labels. But when you're talking about neurodiversity, when you've seen one, you've seen one. There are no two alike. There's similarities in characteristics, but everyone is so different and unique. So this isn't broken down into 25%, 25, 25, 25. And as I speak, I would ask you guys to review, like, hey, is this my child? What percentage of these fit my child, right? And so maybe an overview before we get into this. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about neurodiversity, profiles, strengths, weaknesses, and then I'm going to shift into the impact that has on the family system. I can't just jump into the impact of the family system until you understand what the background is. And I know you understand this, but let's all get on the same page before we start talking about the effect of the family system. So the first area is motor control skills. And generally these are fine motor control skills. So we're talking about lack of coordination, severe balance problems. We're talking about difficulties with fine motor skills. So a question I would ask you that generally resonates with most parents is, how long did you have Velcro shoes for your child? Right? See, you got giggles. See, I knew it works because why? Somebody just say it. Why? You can't freaking tie your shoes, and I have to get to work. Get those shoes tied, and let's get out of here, right? Right? And so it's a fine motor skill, and it takes dexterity in your fingers to be able to make those bunny loops to wrap over the next one, and however you learn to tie your shoes. You see what I'm saying? So it's not just shoes we're talking about. We're talking about the ability to sit on a stool, right? And so no stools in here, right? But for a child with neurological diversity, they're probably not going to play a lot of sports. They can. We're talking exceptions. That would be an exception. Generally, of them aren't going to play sports because several things. One, visually, they can't see the field. They can only see. It's called theory of mind, and the theory of mind is everybody thinks the same way I think. And if they're thinking outside of the way I think, they're being mean to me. So literally, so if you want to study this more, I would encourage you to. It's Theory of Mind. Michelle Garcia Winner is the author, the theorist behind this. And it's this concept which is, I cannot take another person's perspective, that other people have different motives, or that they have different intentions. So just think if your child had the ability to take another person's perspective, they could understand what motives do, and that there's intentions beyond what their frame of reference is, how sweet would that be, right? But the reality is, that's what keeps them so rigid. Theory of mind. And so for them to think outside of their own theory of mind is asking somebody in a wheelchair to get up and run a sprint. It's impossible. Okay? With skill and with therapy, and with the right therapy, that potential is there, but it's not going to happen without a lot of things we're going to talk about today. Okay? So fine motor skills. Any of your children have problems with hygiene? Yeah, right? Okay? Yeah, what hygiene? And so the reality here is, think about what kind of fine motor dexterity does it take to brush your teeth, to stay on your teeth and not on your gums, right? And so I'm not saying that this is the only reason your child won't brush their teeth, or to comb their hair and have that brush grab their scalp. See, I don't have to do that anymore, so it's not a problem for me, right? But you know what I'm saying. And so if you get on your gums and brush your teeth with a hard bristle, it's going to be sore. Why would they ever do that again if they have the inability to do that, right? And so a lot of things. So fine motor skills. I'm sure your child's handwriting is just phenomenal too, right? Right? Probably all of you probably are the only ones that can interpret your child's handwriting because you've had practice at it. That is a fine motor skill, okay? I could go on and on you get it. For time's sake, we're going to move on. Second area, visual spatial organization. Okay, talking in broad generalizations here. Talk to your primary therapist if this does not fit, or if you have questions about this. Generally, they have very poor visual recall. I would expect your child, since you're in this program, to hit home runs verbally. They can talk very eloquently, the vocabulary language way high, right? And so that's where they hit home runs. And so if I were to put this list up here and say, okay, study this, I'm going to take it down and have them write it, and then read this list to them, they're going to do much better by the verbal, by telling them instead of looking at it. So as a parent, what does that mean as a parent? That means put everything you know into words. Don't give them visual cues. Hey, it's around the corner, like directions around the corner. You put everything into words. Okay? Because the reality here is that's where they hit home runs. That's their superhuman strength, verbal. So put it all into words. Okay? They have faulty spatial perceptions. So, a lot of in this crowd are about my age. We grew up on Seinfeld, didn't we? Right? We all know Seinfeld. And if you don't, I don't know where he's been, right? But the reality is, do you remember the close talker? You guys remember that episode? And so we all have our physical bubbles, our personal space. And I was going to do it to Doug here, but I can't even do it. It's so uncomfortable to get in Doug's space. I don't even know him, right? But I can't even do it. But somebody who is more extroverted than I am can just get right up in his grill, right? But it's so hard to do because we have that. These students do not, right? And so faulty spatial perceptions, also like when they have a backpack on, banging into everybody, everything, your car, your walls of your home, everything, right? It's just like, dude, like, what are you doing, right? That's spatial perceptions. Difficulties with executive functioning. Executive functioning, there's a lot of different definitions. I'm going to tell you my definition. My definition is the inability or the ability to plan, to organize, to sequence, and to follow through. That's my definition, okay? A lot of different definitions. And so these students, your child probably has long-term goals, okay? They probably have things that they want, but what they don't have is the ability to build that bridge. Again, to plan, to organize, to sequence, and to follow through. So I want to go to Yale. That is a great goal, all right? And probably could get into Yale, but without a lot of support and a lot of abilities of this is the application, this is the deadline, how are you going to write your essays, all that, it's never going to happen, right? So that's where I'm talking about executive functioning deficits. Adaptive functioning. Adaptive functioning is a psychological term, and it's a test to actually determine how well your child can adapt to the environment versus you having to adapt the environment to them. Okay, you guys follow that? So as a parent, at what lengths did you go to adapt to keep them regulated? Right? And we could take time and we could go through this, and it's actually quite humorous because the first person that's really like, oh, I'll share, then everybody's like, oh, I got one better than that, right? I mean, we're talking, did you take food to their bedroom so they didn't have to leave their bedroom? Was there a pile of trash underneath their bed of the food that they didn't eat? I mean, we could go on and on. Did you have to go to the birthday parties in case there was an explosion? You couldn't leave them? We can go on and on. What about school accommodations? How much did you have to accommodate, right? So the idea here is children with neurodiversity generally cannot adapt to the environment, and the environment has to adapt to them. And so that's what is so difficult as a parent, is because generally the parent was the ones whose full-time job it was to make accommodations at every level. And stereotypical, generally it's the mother that was doing that. Okay, and so unfortunately the mothers get the bad rap in that, but it can also be the father too, but generally it's the mothers. We're going to talk a lot about that when we get into the impact of the family. And they struggle reciprocating emotions, no question. They generally engage with you to get what they want, and once they engage with you and they get what they want, what do? It's a U-turn and they're back to doing whatever they want. And so I call it the vending machine. You are a vending machine to them. They come up to you, they push the buttons that they want, you get angry, you say no, they continue to hold it and bite you till you're like, okay, enough, relent, I'll give you whatever you want, just leave me alone, I've got to get this done. And then they get what they want, they push the buttons, it comes out of the machine, you get it, they're gone, okay? And so a lot of people are like, that's so manipulative. And like, yeah, it can be manipulative, and it looks manipulative, but go back to that idea of theory of mind. It's not manipulative as much as it is, that's their way of doing it. That's their way of coping. That's how they see the world, and that's how the world works for them, okay? Third, and this one is probably the most easily to observe when you see a group of students, and that's the lack of ability to comprehend nonverbal communication. So again, if Doug's a student and he's talking to me and he's asking me for who knows what, doesn't matter, asking me for whatever, and I just do one of these, right? You know, most of it would be like, oh, wow, Shane's not real interested in what I'm doing. And if he's still talking and I did one of these, what would your child do? Exactly. He would turn around and come walk and stand right in front of me right here and continue to talk to me this close, right? Until their needs are met, right? And so they don't understand that. And so tremendous amount of studies done on how much communication is nonverbal versus the analog and digital the words that are coming out of my mouth. And I'm not going to tell you a number, but I can tell you it's greater than 50%. And some even say as high as 80% of our communication is nonverbal. So there's a concept that says one cannot not communicate. Everything has its opposite except communication. You cannot communicate. The very fact of sitting quiet, arms folded, you're still communicating a lot, right? So this idea, they aren't picking up on that. They are missing that. They are missing that, and they're striking out every day on what is going on in the here and now, and guessing a lot of times and making mistakes. So they have difficulties adjusting to transitions. When you think of the dysregulation that occurred the most in your family, I will assure you, most likely it's a transition time. It's from home to school, or even trying to get out of the house to the school bus, or to the school, or from classroom to classroom, lunch break, whatever that transition might be. Transitions are difficult because these students do not have the ability to wing it. They need repetition, they need pattern, and they need consistency. And so when one thing changes in their day, it can throw them for a loop, where some people can just roll with it. These students cannot. We'll talk about that more too. Where are we at? Deficits in social judgment. If we had time, I could tell you a lot of funny stories about boys with, neurodiversity trying to flirt with girls, and how horribly wrong that went because of lack of social judgment. But it's not just that, it's also safety issues, crossing the street, playing with snakes, whatever it might be. You get the idea. They lack the ability to... Okay, finally, the last one is sensory. This is basically any of the sensory modes that we have, which can be visual, it can be auditory, tactile, smells, whatever it might be. This is one that I would say do not underestimate the power of sensory issues. And so oftentimes parents have to cut tags out of clothing. You'll see students wearing a jacket when it's 100 degrees and shorts when it's snowing outside, okay? These are sensory issues. They also, research proven, the palate of a child with neurodiverse, they have a more sensitive palate. And so their diet is way more sensitive. And so everybody's like, well, they're a picky eater. Well, yeah, they're a picky eater because the textures, the things that they're putting into their mouth do not feel right, and they feel absolutely gross. And so generally, this leads up to the fetal position. When they get sensory overload, they will end up in the fetal position or screaming, running away to get away from the stimulus that's coming on them. And they're not trying to run away, they're just trying to get away from the stimulus, okay? So I always say that the environment is king for these students. Put them in an environment where their anxieties can minimize. And this is going to sound real easy, and it's not. But all you have to do is put them in an environment where their anxiety can be reduced, and you'll see elevation in emotional regulation, in executive functioning, in social skills, because the environment is stimulus. It's not stimulus free, but it's sensory friendly. Okay, so this is an average profile, a general profile of students with neurodiverse. Okay, and I'm talking in broad strokes again, but if you've seen one, you've seen one. So it's not 25, 25, 25. But what is it for your child? Where do they rank on this? How do they fit into this? Somebody, please, anybody. Give me some numbers. Generally, just so you know, it will generally equal 100, right? Everything, okay? Is there, whoever said everything, is it 25, 25, 25, or is there one more than the other?
10, 40, 45.
Depends on the day or situation.
Okay? It can change, and it's fluid. And we had 10, 40, 40, 10, okay? So we haven't had any the same. Let me just make that point really loud and clear. You've seen one, okay? Neil, let's go to the next one. Okay, let's talk about the profile. Please.
Do you see anything as babies when babies, putting them to sleep. And Archie, that crying, or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm probably not really versed to talk about infants because by the time they see me, they're already going to be generally past 4th grade. That's when the wheels start falling off, everybody. It's 4th grade. And that is because their cohorts are starting to understand nonverbal communication, getting much more savvy. And so by that time, when I see them, they're generally adolescents. But what I can speak to, which you brought up, which I'm thankful for, is sleep patterns. These students have horrible sleep. Due to their anxiety and due to the ability to not shut off the thinking, they generally go internal with their thoughts and they're just stewing all the time. So getting them on proper nutrition, getting them sleep, proper sleep cycles in and of itself, and the environment, that right there will elevate their abilities to cope and to manage, and that's truly the neurological baseline of before treatment starts. Okay, so I'm sorry I don't know infancy. But I would just be guessing because I just don't have that knowledge. I get them when the wheels have fallen off, right? Okay, so let's talk about anxiety. These students have anxiety every day, all day long, and on the night shift, okay? They're worried about 2 things generally. One, just imagine if you can't read nonverbal communication and you're guessing all the time, you're going to make mistakes. And when you make a mistake and you're in school, especially a public school with neurodiversity, guess what happens? You're going to get hammered. You're going to get bullied. You're going to get teased. This is the low-hanging fruit that often gets picked first, right? Is these children, because they're going around and they're awkward already because of their poor coordination. So they actually even walk differently, if you've noticed. They'll walk on the balls of their feet. Very rarely is the gait normal, and so you can almost identify a neurodiverse child just by the way that they walk. After you've been doing it a while, it becomes more apparent. But they're anxious, and they're anxious about those 2 things. What am I going to do that I'm going to miss, or how bad am I going to get bullied? Okay, what am I going to do wrong? So that leads them to being depressed. They want to isolate, withdraw, get away. I don't want to be around people because when I'm around people, I make mistakes, I get bullied. People are evil. Again, remember, theory of mind. They only see one thing. They can't see that other people have different intentions, which leads to lack of identity, low self-esteem, on and on and on. Okay, so there's just that flow chart. Once you're down that road, it becomes a highway, and they're isolating. They're in your basement. They can't get off electronics, which, by the way, anybody's child here addicted to electronics, right? Okay, let's talk about that, because it's not, first off, it's not uncommon, and second, there's a reason why there is. What nonverbals do you have to read on a computer screen? Maybe these new emoji things that they have, but I don't know what those mean sometimes. But it is black and white. It is concrete, and there is no interruptions. You know when it's your turn. You understand how this is working. Like, it's all methodical, step by step, and there's no human interaction. But it's a safe place for them too, and so they'll thrive. They'll tell you how many friends they have. And when they always say that, I say, how many of them have you met? And the sad reality is, I've never met any of them. But they're my friends. Please.
I'm just curious, how do they do so well in games that really seem to require a lot of visual? Like, I played against my son certain racing games or certain other games that start with F and rhyme with Fortnite. And he's crushing.
He'll annihilate you. That's right. So, great exception. I'm glad you brought it up because I had the same, how is somebody with fine motor skills, deficits, so freaking talented at doing all this stuff and making it work? Great question. Which would lead you to believe, what does that tell us about a neurodiverse child? With deficit and skill building and repetitiveness, they can gain the skill. So if you do something 12 hours a day, and it's not uncommon for them to be on the computer 12 hours a day, that's not sarcastic, that's real. And they're doing this 12 hours a day, how good can you get? And there's your answer, because they can get amazing at it, right? So, all of those deficits I had earlier, every one of those can be mastered like that, is my belief, with repetitive pattern and, what's the right word, motivation. And if it's something that's internally motivating, okay? We're not going to have a lot of time to go into motivation, but there is a theory out there called self-determination theory, which is going to basically, it's a theory that will help you as a parent build internal motivation in your child. Because that's something you hear all the time. I just want them to be internally motivated. Who doesn't? I want to be internally motivated, right? But I go to work because I need to provide for my family, right? And so the reality is we all want that, and we all have that in certain aspects, but that's a model that will tell you this is how you build it. And as a parent, it's important for you to understand that, especially with this kind of child. How do you build internal motivation? And the theory says there's 3 things you need, and you can do any of the 2. I wish I had more time, but I don't. Okay, so these young children are rigid. They can be oppositional, but they can be rigid. And generally, my experience is that they are much more rigid than they are ever oppositional. Can they be both? 100%, absolutely, unequivocally, yes. Okay? How do you know the difference between rigidness and opposition? Let me define rigidity. Rigidity is the inability to shift gears, maybe in a physical place. I am not leaving this room. I'm going to stay right here. Okay? That's pretty rigid, right? Inability to shift gears physically, emotionally. No, I am dysregulated, and they're going to stay dysregulated. Okay? Emotionally, physically, it's just staying stuck, right? A repetitive way of doing it. Okay? Opposition, and how you know the difference is this. Opposition, I know I'm working with an oppositional kid when I'm playing chess with them, when it's a chess game. I do this, they counter me with this. Then I do this, and they counter me with this, right? And so it's all strategic. Rigidness is automatic. It just happens, okay? And so why are they rigid? And just so you know, this is the most difficult thing to work with clinically, and probably the most frustrating thing as a parent. Can you just get in the car? We need to go. I have got to be at work, right? And so, why are they rigid? Okay, they don't understand. Let me back up. I'm probably going too fast. I've had some anxiety because I have so much to cover. I'll slow down. Generally, your children are probably 2 standard deviations above in verbal communication and IQ. Okay, smartest of the smarts, the genius of the world, literally the geniuses of the world. But then when we look at their processing speed, they're 2 standard deviations below. Okay, so I always say they have this Lamborghini Ferrari motor, cognitive horsepower. It's as good as it gets. Who has a real crappy car that they're willing to say what it is, right? It has to be a car. It has to be a car. Prius with they have this Lamborghini motor with a Toyota Prius transmission. Okay? And so all this horsepower is going through this transmission that isn't going to be able to maintain it, and all this power can't get through that weak transmission and apply it to the wheels. So they're not going to be able to move. Okay? So when they're being rigid, you know it's rigid because it's just automatic. It's not like, okay, I'm gonna play chess with you, right? Or I'm gonna do it to spite you, just to make your life miserable. The rigidness kicks in when something new is unexpected, okay? And so something new has been introduced into the scene, and they don't know how to act or how to react. And so again, they don't have the ability to wing it. So what are they doing? And remember, their processing speed is so slow. Oh my gosh, like what is going on? I'm not leaving this room because I don't know what's behind that door. And if I go out that door, I might get eaten by my peer group, right? So therefore, what am I do? I'm going to sit back here and I'm going to dig my heels in. And as a parent, you're like, come on, dude, we got to get out. You give this pep rally, this lecture, with the best of intentions. And what have you just done? They're already overwhelmed. And they have a slow processing speed. And you're giving them all this more information to process. And with the best of intentions, what have you just done? You just flooded them more. And you just increase the amount of time that they're going to dig their heels in. And I know it's counterintuitive, but the best intervention for that when they're being rigid, hey, I just want you to be safe for a little while. I'm just going to back up over here. And when you're ready to talk, come get me. And I'm ready to talk. And I promise you, 9 times out of 10, they will be able, as the processing wheels begin to grind, they're going to be like, okay, I'm ready to go. Let's go. And off to the races. Okay? And that is so counterintuitive as a parent, especially when you have deadlines. But that is time and space is one of the most effective strategies ever for a parent, and is your best friend right there.
Is it rigid if the kid says, the more you tell me to do this, the longer it's going to take?
There's probably a good mix of opposition in that too. And very rarely is it rigid or oppositional. There's a continuum, right? Because somebody as smart as these children are, that's why ABA doesn't work right here, in my opinion, on adolescents, on young children it is because they will begin to use ABA on you as you get going, right? And you are then the one that's the hostage, right? Not, you see what I mean? And so it's not like he's rigid or he's oppositional. It's like there's always a mix of both, right? Very clean. But if we're in a power struggle, how can he fight with me if I'm disengaged? You let me know when you're ready. I'm good, man. And so that I'm actually addressing both oppositionality and rigidity at the same time, which is I'm not going to arm wrestle with you. Like, this isn't I'm not in a struggle with you. You just let me know when you're ready, and we're good to go. And so it addresses both of those. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what it is. But I don't know how you are, but time is super important to me, and I am busy. And so, like, when my son is digging his heels in, and it's like, I have got to go, dude. Like, come on, get your freaking rear end in the car. And if you don't, I'm going to drag you there. And unfortunately, we all have had those horrible times as parents when we did stupid things. And that really solves the problem, doesn't it? Dragging them or making them do something, because it just digs it in more. Okay, so that's rigid. That's different than opposition, but they shadow each other so much, and they look so much alike. But if you employ an oppositional treatment modality to a child with neurodiverse, all you're going to do is elevate their symptoms more and more, right? With the best of intentions. Tough love, let go of it. Consequences, yes, but at the appropriate timing and with the appropriate response. But it's not this tokeny comedy behavior, consequence, stimulus response. Let go of all that, okay? So these children are very concrete. That's why a computer is so alluring to them. Black and white. They see things in black and white, have a very hard time seeing the gray. Lack insight. If talk therapy was effective, you would not be here right now. And if your lecturing was effective as a parent, you would not be here right now. So stop lecturing. It means nothing. It's white noise to them. I know as a parent you have things you want to instill in them and give them your values. That is not going to come through lecturing. I assure you that. You're just wasting your vocal cords. What does work? Skill-based therapy. They lack the ability to take a light bulb moment from you, this insight, put it into their minds, and be like, yes, I'm now going to change because my mom and dad told me this is what's right. No, not going to happen. But what can they do? Gain a skill, learn a skill, implement a skill, generalize a skill. They can take that with them, and they will take that with them. Okay? The more they put that into different contexts. That's why Heritage is built the way it is. The more that you can get behavior in one context to generalize to the next context and outside in the community, all those different things, the more it'll be likely to go with them. Okay. Already talked about poorly coordinated, they're bullied, they're lonely, they're isolated. These children want to connect, have desires to succeed, but lack the skill to do it. Very seldom is there ever a human being that does not want to connect. I've very rarely met that. Okay, everybody wants to connect, particularly these children, but they lack the skill. Again, they're verbal learners, they're poorly organized, and they have academic problems. The academic problems are not due to cognitive ability, it's due to poor executive functioning. Okay, and often being the smartest kid in the room, despite the teacher being in the room. Okay, next. Okay, we've talked about everything that is wrong, all their deficits. These children have superhuman strengths and superpowers in a lot of different ways. And as you read those, you're like, that is not my kid. There's no way that's my kid. But as we talk about them, let me know, okay, if it doesn't fit. First off, they're very creative, more creative than most people, because they don't have the parameters that we put on ourselves of thinking. So they can think, I hate the term, outside the box. They think like that all the time. So they're thinking of new ideas, different ways of being, different ways of doing. Adaptive. How many of your children went to a wilderness program before Heritage? Okay. How many are under 16? Okay? Think of this for yourself. How many of you, if you were shipped away, I hate that term, if you were sent to a wilderness without your family to survive in the woods, cooking your own food, making your own shelter at 16, could have done it? Me, maybe, yeah. Me too, probably. Probably could have. It would have sucked, right? But at the same time, did your child with neurodiversity issues, did he make it? He or she make it? Did they thrive? Did they excel? If that's not adaptability, I don't know what is. Oh, and guess what? Not only do you get to go to the wilderness in Utah probably, or Idaho, or someplace very foreign, you just didn't quite get enough change. Now you get to go to a school in Utah, right? And in the heart of Provo world, right? It's just like, we'll come see you, but you need more work, right? And then you come here and you see them adapting and relating, and it's like, hey, they're doing well. It's like, that is adaptability, okay? And if it isn't, I don't know what is. Just like, I can't learn to play this game, but over time they get it, right? So they are adaptive. Believe me, they're adaptive, but it's one of the things that they fight the most because of the rigidity, because of their inability to see things, but with the proper scaffolding and proper modality and environment, they can adapt very, very well, okay? Persistent, they are like a dog with a bone. When they want something, they are not going to let it go, okay? If there's attorneys in here, I apologize for this remark, but they will find the loopholes in your semantics and use it against you. And so it's not even worth arguing a verbal. If you get in a power struggle verbally, you're going to lose. And not only are you going to lose the argument, you're going to lose the relationship. So it's like, take it to the next level of process. Get out of content of why we're even arguing and go at the next level, meta level of process, which is, hey, when you do this, this makes this happen to me. And you can change the dynamic by getting out of content and staying at a process level. That's super hard to do as a parent, but it's also super meaningful. There is very few things that are overdeveloped in a child with neurodiversity, but one on that list is, and it's justice. Okay? There's an overdeveloped sense of justice. So, if there's a student that has been wronged, these students will stand up for each other and be able to bring it to staff, coach's attention, or to certainly to a parent, right? Hey, this is what has to happen. This has been, and it's overdeveloped. And then at the same breath, they've been bullied. 10 minutes later, they'll go and bully another peer, which shows lack of awareness, right? So overdeveloped sense of justice, social justice warriors, and then at the same time, lack of awareness, okay? Very reliable. I know you're like, what is he talking about? Right? Honest. The kid didn't tell me the truth the whole time he was at my house. You cannot compare what was going on in your home to their capabilities because things were so out of whack. Think it was a tornado, right? And when you get them at baseline in an environment where they can thrive, these things generally come up in spades, okay? And what I've heard from employers that employ these kind of students is that they're reliable, they'll show up to work, they'll be on time because of rigidness, and they're not going to steal money out of my cash till. Bring as many as you can, right? I want all as many as I can get. So they have a desire to succeed. Helping them use your strengths. It has to be a strengths-based approach. Validation is your best friend as a parent. So there's research out there, and I'm going to refer to a lot of research in the remaining time I have, that will tell you, John Gottman, he'll say 5 to 1. 5, you got to put money in the bank before they're dysregulated, because when they're dysregulated, you're going to have withdrawals, right? So you got to put money in the bank when they're regulated so that you can actually have money there when they're dysregulated, okay? So 5 to 1, if me and my spouse, or if me and my girlfriend were interested in getting married, there's research that can say they can tell you with 84% accuracy how compatible we'll be and if we're going to get divorced or not. And one of the measures they do is that number of positives to criticism. And so it's 5 to 1, very compatible. 3 to 1, right on the edge, probably not going to make it, right? Below 3 to 1, not going to happen. And so I would ask you, as a parent, how many times were you focusing on things to catch them doing wrong versus validating things for catching them right, okay, for doing right? So this is very simple, and this can happen right here today when you're with your child, or the next time you're with them. Catch them doing something right, and validate that, Okay, let them know, hey, when you opened the door for me, that was amazing. Hey, I noticed you wearing a new shirt. I'm glad you put a new shirt on. You combed your hair. Haven't seen your hair combed in. You got to be careful, right? You don't want to this. But you know what I'm saying? It has to be authentic. But there's a million ways you can validate, because there's going to be that time when they're dysregulated, and then you need that money in the bank for them, because there's going to be withdrawals at that point. Okay, next slide, Neil. Okay, parenting styles. This is where I'm going to shift. Neil, how much time do I have?
About 20 minutes.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to refer to my notes here. I had some notes. Hopefully we can get through this. Parenting styles. So, as a parent, I got to use that not only what worked, right? And that's sarcasm, right? Because you wouldn't be here if things worked. So let's just be real, right? And you have to almost let go of all parenting books, parenting manuals, because when you're working with neurodiversity, you've seen one, and nothing works at times, right? And what worked at one point isn't going to work now, and what you have to do now didn't work back then, and you're just like, I do not understand. This is the hardest job I've ever done, right? And traditional parenting methods generally do not work, although there's things you can take from all of them and make your own eclectic style for these children, and you can actually elevate their symptoms with the best of intentions without any trying to do that. Okay? As a parent, I'm going to tell you, you have to give yourself grace. Okay? This is the hardest job in the universe. And I'm not just saying that. As a parent, I feel like I'm entitled to say that. And as a professional, I feel like I can say that. We're not looking, as a parent, you never want to make mistakes, right? And so there has to be this continuum of perfection versus progress. And where are you on that continuum? And a lot of us as parents hold on to all these bad decisions we've made, and we hold guilt and we hold shame, and maybe rightfully so. But there also, for you to become the parent you have to be, you're going to have to let go of that at some point and move forward towards progress, not towards perfection, because we're never going to be perfect, especially with this population. So what I'm trying to say is, give yourself grace. You are not alone. We all suck at this. Hit the next slide, Neil. This is a picture that was taken in Costa Rica, where I was a parent. If they weren't my children, I was an executive director of a program for children with neurological differences. Neil was with me, and we took a group of probably 7 students, and 3 staff, and we had a local come with us. So we had 4 staff to 6 students. That's a pretty good ratio, right? And we went way up into the rainforest. And Neil, if any of this is incorrect, you correct me, right? This was probably 10 years ago. And we went way up in the rainforest, and we stayed at a hostel's house. And the purpose of this trip was cultural immersion, help our students generalize skills into different areas. This family it was beautiful. It was amazing. And they had a sanctuary where they kept all these exotic frogs, and it was a rainforest. There was a waterfall we went to go swimming in. And one of our students was very dysregulated. I know it's shocking, right? He's dysregulated. And so I was staying with the student in the bunk houses because he was refusing to leave the bunks. And I'm staying here. You can't make me go. I'm not going to. And it's like, dude, we're in Costa Rica. We're going to go to the waterfall. And he's like, nope, digging my heels in. And so I backed off just like I was doing with Doug. And I was like, hey, I'm right outside the door. If you need me, I'm here. And then all of a sudden, over at the house, I hear this term, oh my God. And I was like, my heart drops. Like, what happened, right? And Neil was over there. And a student came to us. It wasn't me. It might have been Neil, or it might have been the other stuff. And said, hey, can I go cut a walking stick? And it's like, yeah, we're in the rainforest. There's everything there. And so millions of trees. So what does he do? He goes to this tree, and you can see that tree being cut, right? And that tree, and there's a sign in front of it. It's in Latin. And so he cut this walking stick. So what had happened is this was a sanctuary, not only for frogs and lizards and reptiles, but for trees. And he cut this sapling, which was planted in the sanctuary, And the owner, it wasn't the owner found out about it, but it was the native that spoke English said, "Oh my God." And so Neil runs over there. I probably get over there too at some point, and we're like, "What happened? What's going on?" He cut down the only tree in Costa Rica that is special and is now extinct that was planted. And I said, "Okay, whatever it takes. We're going to get a sapling. We're going to get seeds." He's like, No. You don't understand. This is the tree. There is no other sapling. There is no other seeds. This is the only tree, and it was planted here as a way to preserve this tree in Costa Rica. Am I exaggerating this, Neil? 100% accurate. And I'm the parent on this group. We let this young man out of our supervision for 5 minutes, and this happened. Okay, and so it's like, okay, how do I make this right? How do I restitute this? What can I do? And eventually, it got to the point with the translator. There's nothing you can do. The damage is done. And you talk about a professional letdown in my life, it's still traumatic for me. And I'm keeping a lot of emotion in because this was so traumatic. So when I say you've got to give yourself grace, you have to give yourself grace. This stuff is going to happen if you have a child with neurodiversity. Oh, and by the way, the student denied that he cut this tree down.
Then found later that he did have possession of it, felt guilty, so then threw said extinct tree that maybe could have been replanted into the forest and could never be found.
Yeah, he threw it so it never could be replanted. And eventually came clean, but it wasn't until we got home back in America that this happened. Okay, and so you want to talk about colossal mistakes? Like, did they get any bigger than that, right? And there's nothing can be done. So just imagine that. There's nothing you can do to bring about restitution. Nothing. And you're just like, oh my gosh, this was 5 minutes of a student that we could trust to go in a rainforest, by the way, and he goes to a tree that has a sign in front of it that would indicate there's something special about this tree. And his response was, "Yeah, I saw the sign, but it's written in Latin. I don't know what that means." And it's like, that symbolizes, but anyway, next slide, Neil. So, when I say trauma, I don't use that term lightly, especially as a professional clinician. That is something that you don't just throw around this word trauma, okay? But when I say that, I want to back you guys up a little bit, and we're going to probably go to some hard places right now. And my intention isn't to take you there to break you down. My intention is to prove a point. And that point is, as a parent who has a child with neurodiversity, you have experienced trauma, and I'm certain of it, okay? And I'm going to point out some of it right now. So let's just start when your child's wheels started falling off, and your family of origin is like, I don't know what the problem is. When he's with me or she's with me, they act perfect. I don't know what the deal is. What are you doing wrong? That's the implied message, right? What's wrong with you as a parent? Why can't you keep your kid in check? Like, they're perfect with me, and they probably are. It's the reality, right? And does that ring home for anybody? Like, why are you judging me? Why don't you come walk a little week in my shoes and deal with this student and see how this feels before you start throwing those darts at me, right? Or how about, like, I've actually heard this in my own family by my mother-in-law, but you didn't hear it. It was my mother-in-law with another, not one of my children, thank goodness. But it was like, give that kid, let me take them for 6 months. I'll straighten them right out. Just give them to me for 6 months. There will be no problems. And it's like, okay, she got her wish, and guess what? The child was in treatment in 3 months, okay? Literally, in her RTC. And so this idea of family of origin, one of the impacts that raising a child with neurodiversity has is that you begin to isolate from your family of origin. Because they do not understand, and they judge you, and they feel like you're doing something wrong. And if you would just do it this way, just grab that kid up and whip them up. They just need a good whooping. They need some discipline. They're just lazy and unmotivated. And it's like, what is wrong? Yeah, that's what my dad tells me. right? And it's like, no, that is not what's happening here. And I see a lot of heads nodding. And I know there's a lot of things that you're thinking, the judgments that came your way. And what naturally happens is you begin to pull and isolate, so you don't have to deal with that. And you would almost rather deal with your out-of-control teen than have to deal with that from a loved one and a parent, okay? That's an impact. And if that isn't trauma, to be withdrawn and isolated from your own family of origin, tell me what is, right? I don't know, but that is, okay? So, that's a huge one. Research, look, you can look this up. Research is very clear that there is trauma associated. This isn't first off, this is my clinical experience in working with parents for 20 years with neurodiverse, and research backs it up. So we've got both angles, and both are valid. Okay, somebody's clinical experience and what research says. So what research says is there's 2 levels of trauma, level 1 and level 2, and I'll explain what those are. First level of trauma, let's talk about 9/11. We all saw it on TV. Maybe some of you were there, I don't know. But level 1 trauma is experiencing something and not being present for it. Okay, so we all watched 9/11. I watched it on a TV screen when I was going to graduate school in Louisiana, and I saw the buildings come down, I saw people dying, right? I saw all that. That's level 1 trauma. Level 2 trauma is you're in the freaking building, and the building's on fire, and the building's coming down. That's level 2 trauma, okay? So let me ask you, were you in the building when it was on fire, and your child is like out of control, and you're a hostage in your own home, you don't even know what's happening, and like, what is going, I don't even understand this, right? So this is an impact to you, the family system, is that you have experienced probably level 2 trauma. Research would indicate and back me up on that, and my clinical experience would say 100%, okay? And don't underestimate that, okay? Do not underestimate that. And I see people getting emotional. Hell, it's going to get me emotional because we've all experienced it. And it's freaking hard, and it sucks. And the way out of that is through it. So here's a way to know if you experience it right now. This moment is if you got a call from a Utah number on your cell phone, what would happen? Right? What would happen? Your heart, you'd go to fight or flight like that on an 801 number. What the crap is going on? What's happening? Right?
We wouldn't say hello, we'd say, what's wrong?
Yeah. So when I call, I've been doing this a long time, and I train all my employees. I used to train employees. I don't have employees anymore. But I used to say, before you even say hello, this is not an emergency. I'm just calling to give you a heads up. Your son or daughter is so great. That's what I saw, right? And so that's how you know if you've experienced trauma, is if you go to a fight or flight on a phone call, or fill in the blank. You know what I'm talking about? Is this making sense? Is this resonating?
Yes.
Right? And so here we are talking about trauma, and I'm falling apart, right? And I'm a professional, but I'm a parent, and I've experienced it. And I know it. And it's hard, right? So, parenting, this is not easy stuff, right? But you've experienced it. So, let me look at some of my notes here. I can see. Yeah, I know. I love you too. Wouldn't be here if I didn't. Okay. Generally, how many felt like a hostage in their own home? All of us. We all experience that, right? And the family is organized around the person who has the most power. Okay? Who had the most power in your home? Your neurodiverse kid, because you had to have rigid rules. You had to be concrete. You couldn't leave them unsupervised. They were the energy suck of all energy sucks. They took everything from you, right? And you know this because when they walk in the room, all the energy is sucked out of it, and they take it all, right? So the family is organized. At least it was organized. Part of what you have to do is reorganize this in a way where they are not the center of the universe, okay? And so when the family is not organized around them, other people can get attention. Hence, siblings, okay, often the unforgotten child, Clinically, I could tell you some sad, sad stories. But really, the child that isn't the squeaky wheel doesn't get the grease, right? And so don't forget them if you have other children at home. And now that you're in treatment with this child, give them the attention that they need. Because I've sat in too many therapy sessions when a sibling at home is beginning to act out because that's the only way that they can get attention. Okay? All your researchers are going into your child with neurodiversity, but yet don't forget that other child. Okay? And there's probably a lot of feelings and trauma, again, trauma that they have experienced at the expense of their sibling that is unresolved. Okay? Or trauma that is no longer at the surface, so it's just pushed down and we can just move on, right? Let's just move on, okay? So don't underestimate the amount of hurt, of trauma that could be there, and get them the help that they need. Show them that they are as important when they're not acting out. Do I have to act out? I've heard this a lot. Do I have to act out like Johnny to be able to get your attention and affection? Because if I need to do that, I'll do that. And it's like, no, got it loud and clear, I'm sorry, but it's just one of the natural things of the family system being impacted by somebody with neurodiversity. Okay, it's almost impossible when the child is in your home to be a spontaneous family, to do something on a, hey, let's go out for pizza. Oh, that sounds great. It's like, you can't do that. What about this child who can't transition, who can't move, right? So that's gone. You lived in a heightened state of anxiety and awareness. What's going on? I gotta know everything. What's happening? And so you're burning the candle on both ends, and often your own mental health has been shattered, and it is beyond, not beyond repair, but it is as deep as it can get, right? And let's just talk about the marriage dyad, right? So when you have this child in there, you add any kind of stress or pressure, the cracks start to show, right? And marriages begin to dissolve and fall out. And it is not coincidence that there's a high correlation between raising a neurodiverse child and divorce, along with anxiety, depression, and other mental illness. There's not coincidence, right? Because of the trauma. Your relationship has experienced trauma, okay? Let's just talk about financial, right? This is not cheap. There is no easy way to access resources and be able to find resources that are meaningful and people that actually know what they're doing and that aren't actually complicating it, right? Okay, so I've talked a lot about that. I'm going to pick on moms just for a minute because unfortunately you carry the brunt of the work at home, right? I always say moms were the frontal lobe, the ones that organized, sequenced, planned, and followed through. You were their advocate because they couldn't advocate. You were their protector because people saw them as mislabeled them. And you are also every other thing that they needed, okay? And so now they're in treatment. And what are you now? You have lost your identity because you are no longer those things. You are no longer needed. And now is the time for you to get the help that you need in an environment when your child is safe. You need to get your own life back in check. And so these parents generally are the parents that are so involved. Hey, what about this? What about this? What about his academics? What about nursing? What about this? And it's just like, we've got this. Relax. Trust us. Trust this process. You need to figure out your stuff because what you're doing is interfering with therapy and in this process, and it's actually slowing things down. Your best efforts to try to manage, be the frontal lobe, do everything you can for them, is causing things to slow down and to be streamlined. Here's an example of how that happens, a concrete example. You're going to see your child if you haven't already. I don't know the structure of their parent work days, but you're going to see them, and guess what? They have been waiting for you. Because who's the problem solver in your family system? Who's the advocate, right? And so they know that you're going to solve their problems. They know that you're going to be the one to advocate for them. They know these things. So they're like, I'll just wait for my mom, right? And so they're going to come to you with this monkey on their back, and they're going to say, I need you to take this monkey off my back and solve my problem for me. And this is a pattern that has to be broken, or they will be living in your basement until you die, and then they're going to take over your house. And I am not kidding about that, right? because they know you'll solve their problem. And this is going to be one of the hardest things to do this week, is when they come to you with a problem and you're just like, oh my gosh, he wants me to be their problem solving. He's complaining to me and wants me to solve their problem. I can't do that. This is what you do. You say, that must really be hard. Express empathy. Demonstrate the difficult task of that, and then say this, write this down, say this sentence to them, and then you have to shut your mouth and not say a word. What are you going to do about that? Period. Question mark. Walk away. Don't walk away, but be quiet. Because what you're implying is, you have the ability to solve this problem. What are you going to do about it? I'm not willing to take this burden on. This is why you're here, and this is how you're going to deal with that. Okay? And not just how you're going to do it, what are you going to do? And by doing that, they can solve their own problem. Another question you might ask as it gets further along is, who else have you told about this? Because they know you, as the mother, is going to be the one to solve it, right? And so those are two questions that you can ask to really get at the core of what's really going on. Now, I know Neil and George will say, please come to us with any concern that's of big magnitude of nature. They are more than willing to address that and talk with you about that. But we're talking about other things, problems they want solved. I went out of this math class. It was so hard. This teacher is so mean. They never let me turn my homework in. Everybody else gets to turn their homework in. Or even say things like, the smartest of the smart kids, there's a coach that's trying to convert me to Mormonism. And you know what? You need to address that, Mom, because I don't want anything to do with it. And it's like, they're not doing that here. Are you crazy? But they're smart enough to think those things through, right? And so, I'm telling you, they've been like waiting, and this is coming. And if you fall into that same trap, you're keeping them away from you longer, which might be a good thing if you want that. But the goal is to reunite. And this is a pattern that has to be broken, okay? And they can get the skill, they just don't know how to do it. So they're coming to you out of desperation, okay? It's avoiding behavior. 5 minutes. Got 5 minutes, Neil. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. 5 minutes. Where do we want to go? It's actually a therapy interfering behavior, if you want the correct term. So with your best of intentions, you're interfering in therapy and causing it to slow down, which is not fair to your child, okay? And there are situations where I see parents that want to interfere in therapy because they have no identity without being all those things for their child, which isn't going to work. I think I've made that point clear. Okay, next slide. I would just say that parents with children with neurodiversity, they also rank themselves very low in parenting satisfaction, okay? Because they feel like they are miserable at it. And the reality here is, it's kind of like I always say, this was not in the handbook, right? This was not in the handbook. Heritage was not in the handbook when you brought your child home. It's like, but yet here you are. And so, again, find and seek out resources. You just came from a parent support group, I understand, and basically there is no time like the present to find a good therapist at home, to find parent support groups here, on the internet, wherever it is. Find your tribe. Your child generally finds their tribe with each other, and you need to find your tribe. And by doing so, you'll realize that you are not alone, because you're not. It feels like you are alone, and it feels like you are an island, but the reality is there are hundreds of parents out there, millions, not millions, hundreds, thousands in this country that need each other, because nobody understands it unless you've experienced it, okay? So, no time like the present. Now is the time to repair your marriage. Now is the time to find your identity if you're a mother who has been their frontal lobe. Now is the time to get your own mental health, because if you wait until they come home, all you're going to do is be waiting for a disaster. You have to have money in the bank. You have to heal yourself before your child can come back, okay? And so this is a system. Number one catalyst for change is the relationship between the client and the therapist. Number two is that there's change within the family system. This is not drop your child off in Utah, get them fixed, and come back to the same exact experience at home. That is not going to work. They're going to fall right back in. It's called a neurological cascade. Within about 2 weeks, they will fall apart. Things have to be different, okay? Seek out your own therapist. Educate yourself. Having knowledge about neurodiversity is very powerful, okay? And with that knowledge, you can then progress towards being a parent that you want instead of the parent that you feel guilt and shame about. So we've got a few minutes. What questions might you have? I'm going to refer them to Neil or George because I probably won't know them. Right in the very back.
You mentioned something about the traits of building internal motivation.
Mm-hmm.
I know you don't have time to go through, but what are kind of the three types?
Yeah, the 3 traits of building internal motivation. First is autonomy. They have to have choice. So give them choice. You can even be pretty manipulative as a parent and do it in a manipulative way and give them the illusion of choice. You can either do the dishes or you can or vacuum the house. Which do you want to do? Okay, that's the autonomy. They have to have choice. You can either do fly fishing club or you can do cooking club, but you're going to do a club, right? And that's what you're implying. So it's an illusion that they have a choice. There's no choice. You're going to do one or the other. Okay. First thing is autonomy. Second thing is they have to have competence in that. They have to have the ability to be able to have competency to cast the fly rod, to cook. And as they build competency, that's enough. It's building of that skill. The third thing is they have to have relatedness. They have to have relationship in that activity to build that. So the theory says all you need is 2 of the 3. So if it was, I put it in a triangle, boom, 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 and then you just draw any 2. All you need is 2 of the 3, and if you have 3 of the 3, even better. But all you need is 2. And so your therapist here, and I know the clinical director and executive director are well versed in this theory. And if you're not as a parent, it would be wise to be, because it's really powerful. There was a hand right here. Glasses, please.
The connection between sexual identity and preference and neurodiverse kids?
Very high, based on lack of identity and unawareness. Oftentimes, these are kids that are most often, research proven, prone for suicidality because of changing of identity and shifting of that and not finding happiness. And so I don't want to get too far in that. I am not an expert in that, and I'm not versed in that, but it's an identity. It's not first off, there's issues with spatial perceptions of being even in their own body and feeling comfortable in their own body, leading to confusion of gender, leading to lack of identity. Clinically, the first thing I'm going to go to is lack of identity before feelings of gender crisis. And so this might rub people wrong, but this is how I feel and this is how I see it clinically. I don't even talk about gender confusion until they're over 18, because to do so only leads them one way or the other. And until their identity is developed, they're going to be confused anyway, right? So think about your own life. How confused were you about who you wanted to be, what you wanted to become, until you were in your mid-20s, and most of you are probably neurotypical. So your brain is developed quicker. Somebody with a brain that is underdeveloped and still trying to make decisions that have to do with identity need a so much more solid base, and it's not something that I take lightly. So, does that answer your question? Good. I saw another hand. Right there, yeah?
Well, I was going to ask the same question about the sport, but also what do you think of TikTok and its adverse effects on children?
Not an expert on social media. I have no social media myself. I don't play that game. It's a waste of time for me. I'm far too busy to be involved with that. But unfortunately, it's a pandemic in our society, especially with our young children. And if you take it at face value, the problem there is, one, it's screen time, right? Let's just talk about screen time. That's through the roof. Average adolescent is 7 hours on a screen every day of their lives, 7 hours a day. They're only awake for 12, 13, 14, so half of it's on the screen. There's horrible things that can influence them, both in, is there possibilities for things to elevate them and do things in appropriate ways? Of course there is. But where does it go to? And the technology is designed to addict you. There's everything behind it. There's lots of very, very intelligent people behind that, way more smart than me, that makes it addictive in nature, which gets you back on there and gets you back on there, right? Whether it's the likes button, whatever it is. But generally, my experience has been it can be a tool for good, but very rarely have I seen it be a tool for good. Now, you're getting some of my bias, so we're going into some personal preferences here that normally I would stay really clear of. So you please understand that. And so that's how I see that. I think we're wrapped on time, right? Okay, thank you.